The anecdotal evidence fallacy. The speaker is attempting to substitute their own subjective personal experience for credible, objective, and verifiable evidence. Anecdotal evidence usually begins with statements like, I know a person who, or I saw on a TV show once, or I read on the internet that. Here are some examples of how anecdotal evidence might be used in a debate. I know of somebody who God healed miraculously. My great-grandma can see the future. I know Jesus is real because I have a personal relationship with him. One way the anecdotal fantasy often manifests is when a person claims you should take something on faith without any evidence to back up their claim, other than their own say-so. When a person says this without presenting any evidence that their opinion is the correct one, what they're really saying is that you should favor their opinion over your own opinion based on no evidence whatsoever. One variation of this that shows up a lot is when the person says, do your own research. The implication here is that if you're disagreeing with them, it's somehow your job to do their research for them to back up their claim. This is another type of fallacy called shifting the burden of proof. We'll address this one in a future episode, but for now, when a person makes a claim and then suggests that you should do their research to back it up, they're probably using an anecdotal evidence fallacy. Anecdotes are simply personal stories that are not independently verifiable and are subjected to rigorous experimental study. The difficulty with using any sort of anecdotal evidence is that it's not objectively verifiable. You're relying on one person's opinion of what they think the facts are. If their stories have not been subjected to rigorous scrutiny of the experimental method, or to statistical analysis, or to peer review, there's no way to objectively verify if the claims presented as evidence in the story are true or not. So how do you defeat an argument from anecdotal evidence? You could either counter with your own anecdotal example, or simply point out that anecdotal evidence is useless because there's no way to independently verify it. Given the previous example of the claim of a miraculous healing, for example, you could cite counterexamples of your own where a person wasn't healed, or where a person was healed by a miracle from another god of another faith other than the one that the person was claiming. The better approach here, however, would be to point out that anecdotes are simply anecdotes, and one sample makes for sloppy statistics. Douglas Adams, who wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series, illustrated the anecdotal fallacy by telling a tale of hitchhiking adventures in Europe. He once stopped to ask directions of a person he passed on the street, but the person was deaf and mute and couldn't help him. He then asked another passerby, who was also mute and deaf. He asked another, and each person he encountered was mute and deaf. He stated in the story that if he hadn't rounded the corner and seen a hotel that was holding a convention for deaf mutes, he might have had a nervous breakdown. The point here is that if Douglas Adams hadn't rounded that corner, he might have walked away concluding that everyone in Europe was deaf and mute. This is just one of the many problems with anecdotal evidence. If you're relying only on anecdotal evidence, you're relying on the experience of one person instead of on verifiable, objective evidence. While your personal experience might be convincing to you, it's not going to be convincing to anyone who hasn't had a similar experience, especially if you don't have any credible evidence to back up your claim.